You are watching Co-op for Two. It's Sunday, October 13th, 2024, around 1 p.m. Central Standard Time here in Champaign, Illinois. It's Sunday afternoon. That means we are continuing our playthrough of Dear Holmes, the play-by-mail game, really just a subscription letter system. We're on our third letter in a case called A Brush with Death. This will be the final letter giving us clues. There'll be one more letter next week where Holmes, or someone who purports to be Holmes, will contact us with his solution and we will compare ours. Before we do a little recap and talk about some theories, let's do a little bit of bookkeeping. Let me check in with the chat. Teresa's grandmother died. That's very sad. I'm sorry to hear that. YouTube says 10 concurrent viewers, 3 likes. So last night and the night before, Friday and Saturday evening, we played Time Stories Revolution Cavendish, a sort of supernatural haunted house time travel mashup. It's behind me here on the wall. And so I think that means we played it for about 11 hours. I really enjoyed it. It was perfectly suited for our October spooky marathon. And I would say from the 2 Time Stories Revolution boxes we've played, they're much improved from the original Time Stories that I played. I'm really enjoying them. There's some uncertainty about whether they've abandoned the game system. I do hope they make more because I'm enjoying it. There is one more box in this series called Midsummer Something. We will play it eventually, but perhaps not before the end of October, since we're trying to concentrate this month on scary, spooky games. To that end, on Tuesday, we will be starting Blair Witch Season 2 from Hunt-A-Killer. That's a big, expensive 6-part game. We'll play it every night until we finish it. We did play Blair Witch Season 1 last year and enjoyed it quite a bit, though there was some busy work stuff that was a little annoying, but some good multimedia. Everything we've heard about Season 2 is that it's much worse. So our expectations are low, but it's part of tradition to play it, and so we're going to play it. So that's next week, starting Tuesday night. And then we've got a bunch of more games to try to cram in October. Never House. Probably we'll play Never House or Root of All Evil right around Halloween. Those are the more deluxe experience games. We played Witchery Spell last year. It was quite special. All right. So let's recap the case briefly. And then I want to mention something. We have a Discord for this channel. And one of the viewers, DJ, came up with and I spotted something very cool that I wanted to talk about. And then the other thing I want to mention before we get started here, I talked last week about how the Dear Holmes people sent me an email. I was a little worried they were going to say, please stop streaming our letters on YouTube. But they didn't. They said, it's all good. We're enjoying it. And they let me know that they're starting a new service called the Practice Club. I now have put up a link to that in this video description. And the way Dear Holmes work is it's a subscription service. You can sign up for a year at a time or a month at a time, and they send you the new letters. I am a subscriber to that. And I love these play-by-mail games. They're some of my favorite games, and there's so few companies doing it. So I feel I want these companies to succeed and prosper. Anyway, the Dear Holmes have been running for a couple years, And you can't get old letters. It's just new letters. Every month they send a new case of new letters, and you can't buy the old letters from them. And I've been trying to find old letters that people have kept so that we can eventually play through them on the channel. The Practice Club is a new service by this company that sends out the old letters. Now, we talked a little bit about on Discord. So I've got a link to that, and they sent me a discount that I could pass along to viewers. That's in the link too. It's like $10 off. It's not much, but whatever. But it's a very weird thing the way they're doing these old letters, because you basically have to sign up to a subscription service to get old letters, and they're just going to send old letters, I guess, 4 at a time, like a case at a time, once per month. You don't get to choose what old case you get. You just wait and get it in the mail. And what's particularly weird about this is if you have been a longtime subscriber but missed some letters, I don't understand how that works. Are you supposed to sign up and pay $20 a month and most of the time get letters you already own? It's very strange. So I don't really understand why they've done that, why they're not just selling the old cases. We've talked about maybe the best bang for your buck would be if they sold a book of all the old cases. Seems like it would be a win-win there. You could buy a book for however much and get all the old cases, and they'll just print one book rather than have to mail out a new case every month. And $20 a month for an old case, that's $4 a letter. That seems a little high to me. Now, I have signed up for it. Having said that, I'm a sucker for this, and I've signed up. But maybe I should say we're a sucker for this, because the reason I'm able to sign up without thinking too much about it, and the reason I'm able to buy these games behind us, part of the reason is that I have help from you guys in the form of Patreon support. $94 currently comes in each month from Patreon, from viewers like you, that helps pay for these games, and I really do appreciate that. So anyway, you'll have to decide if you want to sign up. I think if you've never if you're not currently a subscriber to Dear Holmes, it does make more economic sense to sign up for the new letters, because you can buy a year at a time at a discount. It's cheaper than the old letters. So if you're considering it, and I think you should consider it, it's quite fun to get a letter in the mail once a week with a case. And we play cases a little bit delayed. So if you really want cutting edge cases, you could sign up to the Dear Holmes. But even better, I really do think it would be a great gift. So if you're looking for a special gift for someone who likes mysteries, but maybe doesn't have enough time to play games or doesn't want to get super involved, getting this as a gift means they can just read a letter once a week. They can think about it as much as they want. It's kind of fun. I think it would be a good gift for a parent who might be inclined towards this kind of deduction, or a younger kid in college, giving them a piece of mail once a week for them to think about with their friends. I think it would be a good gift. All right. Let's do a little recap and then talk about DJ's brilliant insight. Okay, so last letter centered mostly around the autopsy. So we get a nice letter from the coroner who's standing in for Watson. Talks about going to the hospital and looking at the body. What does he observe that's unusual? First of all, the body's stiffer than he expected. He thought rigor mortis would have waned, but it's still stiff. He finds a watch. We're looking at the possessions of our dead guy. A watch, 2 sets of initials, CCS and MK. The CCS is clearly Charles Cavendish. MK we don't know. in the watch is a photograph of three people: Charles, probably his wife, and his estranged daughter, who we're very suspicious of showing up in this case. She was perhaps 15 years old at the time. The date letter N tells us what year this watch was. Can someone remind me what year it is? Because it would allow us to date the daughter currently. We know the current year, we know the date of the watch, we know the girl was 15 years old at the time of this photo. Okay, then a little bit of maybe a hint that the marriage wasn't happy one. The wife is emotionless in the photo, and Annie is also got a sorrowful expression. Body, smelling the body, no discernible smell except perhaps of the smell of gum arabic from his paints, the binder in the paints. The toxicology shows some metals, some poisonous metals: cadmium, arsenic, white lead. But then he says he's a painter. He's been licking his brush for years. He probably has built up a tolerance of these, and the presence of them should be nothing surprising. He says the body does look a little weird, plumbism or mercurialism. We might want to look that up a little bit. But he's saying it makes sense that you would just call this an accidental death from these poisons. But he thinks the other possibility is maybe the toxicologist just saw these metals without knowing anything about Sir Charles's background and said, okay, those must have killed him. I'm not even going to bother looking for more poisons. He mentions again the smell of the gum binder. That's kind of odd that it's mentioned twice. He also points out that the body was all twisted up for some reason. Again, that might suggest the particular poison used. All right. So we might want to come back to this and talk about what poison we think matches these symptoms. Persistent rigor mortis, twisted body, possibly even the smell of gum binder. All right, continuing down, our guy meets he's meeting the Dutch person who is also staying at the hotel, and he tells us a little bit more about an incident they had. And we do find out that it was happening on the day he died. They go painting together. I'm not sure what I was writing here. They go painting together late in the afternoon. They have a run-in with John Hardwick, the local rat catcher, who's mad at him. They're mad at each other. And then they sit down to dessert in the tea shop. While in the tea shop, Sir Cavendish gets given a little pastry by the waitress. The waitress says, while she's giving it to him, don't mind this rat catcher guy, who we see, or the Dutch guy sees, messing with Sir Charles's paints, perhaps putting a poison in them, but we think he might have just been marking it up somehow. And we talked about, even if he did put poison in the paints, the timeline doesn't seem to match, because it seems like Sir Charles was probably done painting by 5 p.m. He wouldn't have time to lick it, and would the rat catcher know what tin to put poison in, etc. But the waitress says, oh, don't mind him, that's the rat catcher. And then he says that the waitress seemed very happy that Sir Charles had brought a new customer in, and gives him a pastry. The young lady who served us offered Sir Charles a piece of fruitcake in thanks to bring in a new customer. She seemed pleased that Sir Charles had brought her a new customer. The doctor says Was it delicious? DeWitt, the Dutch guy, says, I don't know. I didn't taste it. It looked wonderful. I asked for it. Had nice almonds on top. I asked if I could have one. She said, unfortunately, Sir Charles has been served the last piece. Thus, I settled for strawberry sponge cake. Our doctor who's interviewing him says, and were those the young lady's precise words? DeWitt thought for a moment before he answered, I'm fairly certain, yes. And then a woman comes in and they talk about tobacco a little bit more. I guess that's it. Okay, so we've got a couple of suspects, including this Dutch guy who seems to be a real tobacco expert, and that's why he's here and doesn't seem suspicious. Okay, so now our radar has gone off on the estranged daughter. So the chat says, based on the year of the clock, it looks like she would be in her early 20s now. Okay, so our radar has been going off about the idea that the estranged daughter may be the killer, and then he may be poisoned. And when we saw him served this special dessert by this young woman waitress, the bells went off. And I think this waitress is going to turn out to be the estranged daughter poisoning him. But a couple of observations regarding that hunch. The first one is, she knows the local rat catcher, so she hasn't followed Sir Charles Cavendish to this town. She's been working here for a while, so that puts a little bit more difficulty in terms of her poisoning him. So, but two possibilities. Either she has always lived here, and he is coming here particularly to try to rebuild relationship. And one of the objections that the viewers had were, wouldn't Sir Charles recognize his daughter? Like, how can this waitress be his daughter poisoning him? He would recognize her. And one possibility is that he just wouldn't. But another possibility is, yes, of course he recognized her. He knows it's his daughter. He's come here and he's trying to re-establish a relationship with her, and she's poisoned him. But then the other possibility is a little more cartoonish, that she just happens to work here as sort of a down-and-out waitress, and in walks her estranged father, coincidence of a lifetime, and she says, now's my chance, I'm going to kill him. But that is a little bit of an obstacle. Now, I want to point out the brilliant observation by DJ. And now it might be nothing, but it's quite nice. When we read this, our ears perked up at this question the doctor asks. So DeWitt is recounting the whole story. He says what the woman said to him. He asked if he could try it at the shop. I asked if I could have some too. I was told, unfortunately, Sir Charles has been served the last piece. Then I settled for a delightful slice of strawberry top Victoria. The doctor says, were those the young lady's precise words? He thinks for a minute and he says, yes. And we read this and we said, that's an odd little interaction. Why is this guy asking if those were the precise words? What has he picked up on that we haven't? And we reread this last week. We reread the statement. I asked if I could have some too. I was told, quote unquote, unfortunately, Sir Charles has been served the last piece. And we looked at that sentence and we said, what is it that's caught his ear? And we didn't really, we didn't notice anything. And DJ said, hey, I think the thing that he's picked up on that strikes his ears as odd is she says, Sir Cavendish has been served the last piece. In other words, DJ picked up that she's familiar with this guy. She's calling him Sir Cavendish, Sir Charles. And that might be nothing, but it might be something. Like, how does she know to call him Sir Charles? That's an interesting question. I mean, he is Sir Charles. The people who know his background know that he's Sir Charles. But it is a little odd that the waitress knows that he's Sir Charles. He might have introduced himself. I'm not sure he would say, my name is Sir Charles. Probably not to a waitress. But she might have overheard someone talking to him. So it's possible it's nothing. But it's also possible that it is significant that this waitress, no matter what, the waitress knows who he is. That's a bit of a clue. It's possible she's a paid assassin, right? That's the other possibility, that it is her that's killing him, but that she's been hired to kill him. And she's not the daughter. Either way, she has revealed that she knows who it is, which is interesting. I hope it's a real relevant clue. That's the type of subtle clue I love in narrative mysteries. I just wish they hadn't signposted it so heavily. Well, they may have signposted it, but we missed it, even looking for it. All right, let us open our letter for today. All right. Dear Mr. Holmes, August 19, 1894. I am grateful for your telegram and advice, though I hesitate to use such a word in these circumstances. I was delighted by your appraisal. Within moments of reviewing it, I recalled a death certificate I once encountered for a careless photographer who had ingested a small but fatal quantity of liquid used in developing his photographs. As at his postmortem, the man's limbs were seen to be twisted in the extreme, due to the severe muscle contractions brought forth by the chemical. Indeed, poisoning is now seeming like our most likely explanation for Sir Charles's death. Even so, what sort of poison and how he came to ingest it, I cannot deduce. So I've spent my time following your instructions closely, and I'm writing to impart you with a number of remarkable new details. After a somewhat turbulent night, I was looking forward to a hearty breakfast at the Bull's Head. Sitting at my breakfast table, I was cheered by a delightful cooked breakfast of smoked bacon, black pudding, well-seasoned sausages, and fine country eggs. I also had the pleasure of exchanging some words with Mr. DeWitt's acquaintance, Mrs. Marissa Gagne, before once more running into DeWitt himself. Mrs. Gagne was humming to herself as she enjoyed a bowl of porridge just a table away from me. She was quick to recognize me when our gazes met. "Oh, how now, good sir," she trilled. "I remember you. Mr. DeWitt's friend. Oh, we say, Mr. DeWitt's friend, yes?" I grinned and formally introduced myself. "Where's he off to today?" "Ugh, where's he off to today?" she asked. I shrugged, noting that, though I did hope to encounter him again, we were not quite as well acquainted as it seemed. "Brilliant painter, isn't he?" Mrs. Gagne remarked, wiping steam from her spectacles. I nodded. She sipped another spoonful of her meal, then went on. "Are you two collaborating?" I shook my head, explaining that I merely had some questions to ask of him. "Well, he's a lovely man," she answered, taking her last sip of porridge. "I'm sure he'd be happy to chat. If I see him on my way to the station, I'll be sure to let him know." And with those words, she gently dabbed in her mouth with the cloth. "Now, unfortunately, my business cannot brook this dalliance any longer, as the bard might say. My husband awaits my return, and I've much to prepare for my lectures at Royal Holloway next week." I wished her well as she stood, and she thanked me, adding, "If you do find yourself in London, do stop by and pay me a visit. I'll have you know that Schroeder and Gagne, those are our names, carries some of the finest tobacco in London." I assured her I would be calling on her. And Mr. Schroeder, whenever I next found myself in London, and through the inn's doors she went. It was but 3 minutes later, whilst I enjoyed my coffee, that the figure of Mr. DeWitt happened to enter through those same doors. He paused briefly to adjust the large paint box which hung from his shoulder, before then gathering up his easel and folding chair in readiness, no doubt for a further day's painting by the river. Seeing that he was about to depart, I called out, "Good evening, Mr. DeWitt. Wonder if I might have sight of your paints. I have been known to dabble in oils, but that was quite some time ago." Jacob DeWitt beamed and proceeded to an empty table, where he unhitched the paint box from his shoulder and opened it to allow my inspection. The box itself was of an ingenious cantilever design, and had sections for a variety of brushes, tubes of paint, cleaning rags, and various jars of oil, and, of course, turpentine. I moved in closer and peered at the contents most carefully. Finally, I passed my nose across the whole box, sensing nothing extraordinary or unusual. I simply exclaimed, "Ah, how I miss the vivid colors and the smell of oils. You have a fine paint box, Mr. DeWitt. I'm grateful for your indulgence in allowing me to see it." Upon hearing this, DeWitt gave a mock bow. "It is fine hobby, doctor. I bring this box with me every time I come to England." He chuckled as he continued, "We have lots of waterways in Holland, but we lack the beautiful hills. I love the rolling countryside here, never tire of painting it." I smiled and nodded. The differences in landscapes between our two countries was not something I had previously considered. I thanked him once more for his time, and on returning to my seat, I watched as DeWitt swiftly collapsed his marvelous paint box. Once all was packed away, secured and shouldered, he gave me a cheery wave and left me to my thoughts. These, for the most part, concerned the previous day's events and your instructions to me, in light of which I decided to venture out toward the river. I figured it was finally time to seek out further refreshment and perhaps a slice of cake and conversation at the tea shop DeWitt had visited with Sir Charles. To that end, Mr. Pryor offered me a brief directions to the Orchard tea shop, however, only after thoroughly detailing his opinion of Mr. DeWitt's painting hobby. "See," he began, "I'm reading a book now, very fantastical, like Alice's Adventure in Wonderland. And I know what you may think, but it's not nonsense. It's quite good. Lots of novel ideas about the future." He scratched at his neatly groomed beard. "Anyways, my point is, painting will soon be a thing of the past." He paused to take in my look of bewilderment, then continued, "You've seen photographs, yes? Cameras? Well, there's a man, Eastman. He's making new ones. Kodak, he calls them. He's been selling them for more than 5 years now. But you wait. I wager In 10 or 15 years' time, every man who used to be a painter will be clamoring about them. Paint any scene with just the touch of a button or two and without any of the mess left behind by oils and all. He stopped, marveling at the thought, and finally added, not to mention paints can make a man ill. They're practically poison, although I wouldn't say I hate paints. No, but I'm partial to my pastels. For my part, I promised to learn more of these Kodak devices on my return to London and took my leave. Setting off from the Bull's Head, my destination was but a short walk from the town along the banks of the River Wey, abutting the towpath. At first glance, the tea shop appeared to be a small cottage with a fine lawned flower garden in front and an impressive fruit orchard to the rear. Even from a distance, I could see netted areas for soft fruits like strawberries and raspberries, and also trees bearing apples, plums, greengages, and pears, all ripe for picking. The cottage, it seems, might have been a simple dwelling once in the past. However, on looking through its bow windows, one on either side of its entrance, I could see several elegant tables, covered with checked tablecloths and decorated with small bouquets of flowers. Around these small tables sat a mixed clientele, couples, young families, and some fashionable ladies, all of whom were taking tea. I stood for a few moments observing not only the customers, but also who was serving them. The staff comprised a single fresh-faced waitress, aged less than 20 years, and a young woman of, I would say, 25 years, whom I took to be the proprietor. As I watched the pair moving between the tables, it was clear that each had her own area to serve. I deliberately chose to sit in the area served by the proprietor. After only a minute or so, she approached my table. She was a tall, slender figure with honey-colored hair, and she moved with an unexpected grace for someone simply serving tea. One might well imagine her as a governess for the children of a well-to-do family, or perhaps as a traveling companion for a grand lady. She was dressed in a long ankle-length gray skirt, above which she wore a soft white pleated blouse. This was fastened at the collar by an elegant gold and sapphire brooch that seemed curiously familiar to me, though I could not fathom why. Standing beside my table, she turned over to a fresh page in the small notepad she carried and greeted me. "Good morning, sir. What may I get for you?" I grinned, asking, I think I might have a pot of tea, and perhaps I might choose a slice of cake. I have it on good authority that your confections are most excellent." The young lady nodded appreciatively. "It is all homemade, sir. I pride myself on using only fruit that has been grown in our orchard for our cakes and tarts. We even dry our own grapes for our fruit cakes. Perhaps you may like to choose something from the display?" On saying this, she turned slightly, pointing to the rear of the tea shop. I rose and thanked her before walking the few paces to the display. It was here that I came upon a large glass-fronted cabinet in which a mouth-watering selection of scones, fruit tarts, and cakes were arranged. In truth, Mr. Holmes, the selection of cakes and tarts made my necessary choice a difficult one to make. Not to mention, I also had to feign ignorance and request a recommendation, whilst at the same time identifying a discreet means of obtaining information concerning the tea shop and its proprietor. To do so, I attracted the attention of the younger waitress, and after a minute or so of deliberation and discussion, I innocently pointed towards a dark, rich fruitcake. Requesting a piece, I was certain that it would be just as delicious as any of the other sweets being sold. Still, my stomach was somewhat disappointed, as a lovely ginger cake had called its attention. Nevertheless, my choice of fruitcake would serve a greater purpose, and as such was requisite. From my conversation with the young waitress, I learned that the tea shop is owned by Miss Annie Knight, and that the establishment has been open barely a month. I pondered this for a moment, then returned to my seat, observing that midday was approaching and that the tea shop's customers had begun to drift homeward for luncheon. Within a few minutes, my pot of tea and hot water jug were brought to the table by Miss Knight, together with a rather impressive slice of sumptuous fruit cake, soaked in fine brandy and redolent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. I examined it appreciatively as it was placed before me, but then, recalling my conversation with Mr. DeWitt, I felt that some small detail was not quite right. "Ah," I sighed, "in truth, I'm accustomed to a neat layer of almonds atop my fruitcake." Miss Knight apologized, explaining that, we don't want anything getting in the way of our cake's rich texture. I'm afraid it's served like this at the orchard. I do hope you'll find it just as lovely." I did not press the matter any further, and as Miss Knight arranged the final item of my order upon the table, I presented her with my card. "My name is Dr. Clive Weaver. I wonder if you might also spare me a moment of your time." The young lady looked about her, and on seeing that no new customers had entered the tea shop, she pulled out a chair from the table and joined me. I was immediately forthcoming and began thus. "I am investigating the death of Sir Charles Short, a visitor from London who, from what I can gather, appears to have died from some sort of poisoning." Miss Knight was unmoved by this. I continued. "He was, it seems, something of an amateur artist who enjoyed painting the flora and fauna of our waterways. I'm trying to determine his movements over the last 2 days and was wondering if you might have seen anyone along the riverbank with an easel." The young lady pressed her lips together and frowned. "Why, no, Dr. Weaver. I believe I have seen no one. But he may, of course, have been further up the river, towards the mill. Many artists, I've heard, use the mill as a subject for their paintings." I nodded, paused for a moment before saying brightly, "A pity. But, well, nothing is lost, for I have an appointment tomorrow morning with his painting companion, a Mr. DeWitt. Apparently he had been constantly at Sir Charles's side for the last day or so, as they painted together." As I uttered those words, all color seemed to drain from the young lady's face. To this I did not react, and appeared to be oblivious as I continued. "Whilst I was choosing my cake, I asked the waitress about your splendid garden and orchard. She told me you had only recently moved here from London, but you do indeed seem to have green fingers." Miss Knight let out a weak smile, saying, "Thank you. Well, it's perhaps from my employment in the herbariums at Kew Gardens. I've always enjoyed working with plants. During the several years my mother was ill, I began to tend our lawn and flower garden. Upon her death, I came here to begin a new life. I'm grateful this property allows for such a marvelous garden." On hearing this, I offered my condolences and asked, "Did your father accompany you to Guildford?" The young lady rose, saying in a voice that was ice cold, "No, Dr. Weaver. My father left us years ago, under circumstances I would be inclined to describe as harsh, if not violent. Now, if you'll excuse me." I lowered my head in acknowledgement, and Annie Knight left the table in some haste. I sat impassive for a minute or so, deep in thought, as I continued to eat my slice of cake and drain my teacup. Then, brushing the few cake crumbs from my waistcoat, I grew troubled. Alas, my visit to the orchard had only served to provide more questions than answers. Hence I paid my bill and hurried from the tea shop to the Bull's Head. Finding once again a quiet corner of the inn, I filled my pipe and proceeded to smoke incessantly for close to 20 minutes. As I sat, drawing steadily upon my pipe, I concentrated my attention on Sir Charles. He was seen as an invaluable asset to the government, and upon his death it was feared he may have been assassinated by the Boers. In this regard, I would be remiss to completely dismiss the Dutchman, Mr. De Witt. On the other hand, it is necessary to consider whether John Hardwick, the rat catcher, had any part in this tragedy. There was certainly ill feeling between him and Sir Charles, and needless to say, Hardwick would have had unimpeded access to rat poison. He too could have known, much like De Witt knew, that Sir Charles was wont to refine his brush tip by placing it in his mouth. And further still, are Miss Knight's observations, or rather the lack thereof? Did Mr. De Witt lie about painting near and patronizing the tea shop with the deceased, or is something else amiss? I trust, Mr. Holmes, you might be able to solve this conundrum soon. I must, tomorrow, return to my office in Worthing, but I look forward to hearing from you again in the coming days. I am yours faithfully, Dr. Clive Weaver. Okay, well, it seems like our theories were all correct, and this seems like a very cut and dry case to us, I believe. Let's check in with the chat. Okay, so we've pinpointed her at 20-something, in her young 20s. And so when we meet the proprietor here, her name is Annie Knight, which is, of course, the first name of the daughter, Annie. So that's that. It's clearly the daughter. She denies knowing Sir Charles. She denies that he came in. And when she serves this special cake, she says, we never put almonds on top of our cake. So it's clear that she's poisoned Sir Charles, and she knows who Sir Charles is. And the other little extra clue that really was gilding the lily, quite literally here, is that she's got a gold brooch that this guy says seems familiar. And what is it? It's because there is a gold brooch in previous letter. Now, what is it? Do we actually, does anyone remember the details of it? Is it the gold watch that's familiar, not a brooch? Or is the photograph? There we go. Okay. It's the gold watch, but it's his late wife. She gazed out from the photograph. She's got a high-collared dress graced by a large brooch at the neck. High-collared dress graced by a large brooch at the neck. So when he sees the brooch on Annie, it strikes him as familiar, but he can't quite place what's familiar about it. But surely what's familiar is it's the same brooch as in that picture. And if that wasn't enough, we say, how did you come here with your parents? And she says, no, not only that, my mother died and my father was a bastard and treated us poorly. So it's clear that she is the daughter of Charles Cavendish. It could not be more clear. And that she blames him for the mother's death. You might also pick up that her work in the herbarium is probably where she got her poison that she used. She's probably poisoned him with poison that she got at the herbarium. So really the only question I have is whether she's brought the shop over here a month ago in anticipation of hunting down and killing Sir Charles, or whether he stumbled here by accident or is trying to patch things up. DJ points out that actually her new name, Annie Knight, the K in Knight matches the initials that we spotted on the watch that we didn't know how to explain. Charles Cavendish and M.K. M is going to be the mother's first name, and K is going to be her maiden name. K for Knight. So the wife is going to be like Mary Knight. And now Annie, the daughter, has reverted to her maiden name. So we have clearly solved this case. The only pieces we could try to figure out is what the poison was and whether she's moved here to kill him ahead of time or whether he's come to visit her. So here are the questions we were asked. Was it due to natural causes or has life been prematurely curtailed? If by whom? And is some foreign intrigue linked to his death? So the answer is going to be he was poisoned by his estranged daughter as revenge for how he treated her and her mother. It wasn't foreign intrigue. It was simply revenge. Now, I guess to answer my extra question about whether she's moved here to kill him, we might be able to answer that if we can find comments about, does Charles Cavendish always come here? Trying to remember if we're told that he regularly vacations here. He goes tobacco, he travels there. Let's see. Sir Charles had taken a few days' leave, secured a room at the Bull's Head, apparently so he could pursue his hobby of watercolor. Ruffled a few feathers. Seems like he doesn't regularly come here. And she did know him. I suppose if I had to guess, I would guess that he's come here to visit her specifically, but I guess it's not important. Why did she turn pale when DeWitt was mentioned? What was her strong reaction? Oh, that's obvious. That's obvious. Let's see if the channel can answer that before I answer it. Debbie says, why did she turn pale when DeWitt was mentioned? And DJ Money Cut says, what was her strong reaction when hearing Charles and DeWitt were together? And Joe J. Anderson has the answer. She understood at that point that we very well may catch her in a lie. That's exactly right. So if I reread that, you'll see that that's what's happened. So we ask her, we say, I think Charles Cavendish might have been in the area painting. Have you run into him? And she says, we say, have you might have seen anyone with the easel? And she says, no, I don't think I have seen anyone like that. But, it's not unusual. He probably were just going up the road. And then we say, oh, that's a shame because he's got a companion, Mr. DeWitt. And the two of them were together as they were traveling. And then she goes, oh, boy, they're going to talk to that guy. And he's going to tell them that the two of them were in this shop and that I did see them, and they're going to catch me in a lie. Yeah. So that's why she's freaked out. She realizes there's a witness who can put them in this place together. And she knew his name even. She may even realize, oh my God, not only was he in there, but I can't claim I didn't see him, because not only did I see him, I knew him by name. So she's claiming she doesn't know Sir Charles. So we have caught her in a lie. And here she realizes she could very well be caught in that lie. Rob says, well, he only asked if she saw anyone with the easel, not if he had been in the shop. Well, that's not right. That's not quite right. Because he mentions his name, Sir Charles. And she says, no, I never saw any person like that. So she's denying she knows him. She's denying the name rings a bell. And she's denying she saw anyone with the easel. So it's clear she's lying. It's clear DeWitt, maybe she realizes she referred to him by name. But the other thing is, you say that she never saw him with an easel, but that's not quite right. Because remember, in our previous letter, she actually stumbles on them while they're watching the guy mess with his easel outside. And she says, oh, that's just the rat catcher. Pay no attention to him. Look, so he watches a guy put something in the easel. And DeWitt asks her about this guy who just messed with the easel. And she says, oh, that's the rat catcher. He's always causing trouble. Don't pay any attention to him. So it's going to be hard for her to claim that she didn't know about the easel and the painting. But even so, it's clearly she knew his name anyway. Marlene says, if she did poison him, it was spur of the moment. Joe J says, do I remember wrong that Sir Charles said somewhere that he likes the landscapes around here, implying he used to be there? Yeah, I wonder. I don't know. I don't know if we would be able to find that. Do we know if Sir Charles and DeWitt was served by Annie and not the other girl? That's an interesting conversation. Well, that's an interesting possibility. So that's clever observation. I think the answer to your question is we do now, because of her reaction to being caught in a lie. But I suppose if she didn't have this weird reaction, then you could imagine that it was the other woman that served them. But now that we saw her reaction, we know it was her and she lied. Also, we know because it's his daughter. So, but that's an interesting... Debbie says, I think it was the other girl that served them, but the proprietor presumably knew about it. I don't think so. No, we know ages. We know Annie... Why would the other girl be the one that served them? That doesn't really make sense, does it? Why would the other girl poison him? And Marlene says, if she did poison him with spur of the moment, remember that it can't really be too spur of the moment because she had to have poison handy, right? Poison that she put in almonds. So it had to be planned well ahead of this visit. But it's possible that he stumbled onto her tea shop the previous day and she's decided to poison him. But I would lean towards premeditated for her to have ready the cake to poison him, have the poison. Like, she's not a hobbyist poisoner, so she had to have brought that poison with her. But I am curious about this comments by Debbie about thinking it was the other waitress who poisoned him. The other younger waitress? Why do you think, what makes you think it was the other waitress? Just because he wouldn't recognize his daughter? That doesn't make any sense to me. I think the other waitress shouldn't know his name. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It seems more likely that he could recognize his daughter because he knows his daughter opened this shop, and maybe that's why he's come here, to track her down. And she's pretending to be cordial with him. It might be another clue too, that if she didn't recognize, if she was innocent, the proprietor would be able, let me ask the other waitress. Maybe she remembers him coming in, but she doesn't say anything about it, so she's trying to cover it up. But the other waitress doesn't have to be involved. She could have been directed what to do by Annie. I don't understand why you guys want to have the other waitress involved. Marlene says, why the almonds? It's because we think that the poison smells of almonds. Right? What's the poison that smells of almonds? We think that was the poison used, or disguised the taste of almonds, but probably almonds is it arsenic? What is cyanide? So we think that's the almond smell of the poison is disguised by almonds. I don't understand why some of you want to make the other waitress the one that served them. It's only so that he doesn't recognize Annie. I think you got the same problem, right? Which is that he's been in here several times. Wouldn't he notice his daughter is the other woman? Doesn't it seem more likely that rather than this as a total coincidence, the estranged daughter works here and he knows it, and that's why he's come here to talk to her and hang out with her and try to rekindle their relationship, but she's having none of it. But it looks like multiple people think that he would recognize her and he didn't. And he just happened to stumble here, or she's bought this place the month prior just to kill him. I'm guessing she moved here because she knew Sir Charles liked to holiday here. I mean, that's a possibility. That's a lot of effort to go to kill someone, to buy a tea shop at where the person vacations. Doesn't it seem much more likely that she's bought this tea shop to retire and own, and he showed up at her doorstep trying to get back together with her, and she's like, I'm not having it? To me, that seems more plausible. DJ Moneycut says, it's just weird that they both recognize each other, but neither one would say anything. That's a good point, but she knows his name, so they've met previously. I think he's come in the day before, said, you're my daughter. You're not going to treat me this way. We're going to fix things up or whatever. And then today when he showed up, he's just not pushing the issue. She's trying to be friendly. Rob says it's pretty implausible either way. Either it was a coincidence or carefully planned months in advance. She calls him Sir Charles as her dad. Melissa asks unscrupulously, what's the word? Not unscrupulously. Anyway, I think, they've got a cold relationship. They're estranged. Debbie says, look at the other girl's dialogue again. She doesn't sound like an upper class woman. I mean, we don't have much of an interaction with her, right? Okay, let's see. Well, you're right. In fact, I remember remarking on that she's talking with this sort of slang. Do we get told what she looks like? We waited back to the window. I did approach the young lady who had served us tea and asked about him. She said with some distaste, that's just John Hardwick, the local rat catcher. We pay him no mind. She seemed pleased that Sir Charles had brought her a new customer. The young lady who served us offered him a piece of fruitcake. I mean, I did mention that she's speaking in slang, and I guess the other clue, which I pointed out as well, which is that she knows about the local rat catcher. That seems like she's more of a regular in the town. So those things are consistent with the idea that the proprietor is not a local woman. She's more elegant. She wouldn't speak in slang. All right, you're winning me over a little bit to the idea that the younger girl so maybe the proprietor gives her a cake and says, give this to Sir Charles. It's an interesting idea. I mean, I guess it's possible. It's certainly possible. But it's a little odd. Like, how do you she would she know that they don't have any more of it? It's a little odd. It seems like the woman poisoning him would be more consistent to be in charge of it. But it's possible. Rob agrees. The young girl took the order. Annie prepared it and sent it out with the young girl. Debbie says, yeah, that's my idea. Annie put the poison in the cake. Well, it's certainly possible. It's certainly possible. I don't think it helps too much. I still think it's a little hard for him to, if you think he wouldn't recognize her, then he would probably recognize her in the shop. Melissa says that gives her a step away from the connection so she can say she didn't actually give it to him. She doesn't know what he ate if he asked. Almonds can contain arsenic. Non-processed almonds tend to have higher levels of arsenic. I mean, I think she probably refined the cyanide or arsenic. Smelled like almonds. She put it on top and then hid the flavor with almonds. Not that the almonds themselves, normal almonds would kill him. Obviously, she's lying about not having any more of it, or Annie pretended there was no more. Surely he would recognize the brooch if nothing else. Well, that's an interesting point. Marlene says the consumption of 50 bitter almonds can be deadly for adults. Interesting. All right, well, so there's a little bit, we're a little unsure about whether Annie directly handed him the poisoned fruitcake, but, or handed it to the assistant. But clearly Annie has killed him, poisoned him on purpose. Maybe she's disguising her appearance. It is, maybe she wasn't wearing the brooch, but now that she's killed him, she can wear it. So, hard to know exactly. But a harder question is still whether she has moved here, bought this land just to track him down and kill him, which seems unlikely to me. That's why I'm still leaning towards the idea that Sir Charles Short Cavendish has come here explicitly to connect with his daughter, and she's decided to kill him. Although that's dangerous, but I could be convinced either way. All right, well, I think we've got this case pretty much locked up. When we get her into the interrogation room, we'll call in that other waitress. We'll put the screws to her. We'll pressure her a little bit. Surely she'll admit if she was served, if she was the one who served this piece of fruitcake. We still have a week, as Rob points out, to discuss it on the Discord. Not the hardest of the cases. Seems fairly straightforward, and tons of evidence in this case, unlike some of our cases. But on the other hand, also one of the more nicely written stories in terms of flavor and writing of the Dear Holmes cases. Next week, we will read the solution. I'll be interested to hear where you would rank this in the other Dear Holmes letters we've played. So be prepared to rank this with the other cases. And I'll see some of you on Tuesday for Blair Witch Season 2. A pleasure as always. I'll see you next time.